So I guess we can probably get started. We're just waiting on Udai, so hopefully he'll join us shortly. Welcome to the art party, everyone. The art party is something that it's still going on. I think that the organizers who were Mercury Studio members decided to keep it going, so that's exciting. I think there will be one sometime in the first quarter next year. And what it is like an open mic for visual art, basically. And so for that event, people would sign up ahead of time, much like you all did. And then we would all gather in a room together and people would get up and show photography, or I played a song I wrote once, or really anything, because there's not a lot of opportunities for people to show visual art in the same way, but people can go to an open mic and play music and get kind of feedback from people. So I think it's cool that we're doing it for this project because I love to hear from people about what they create. I think it makes the experience of consuming the art a little bit richer. So I was psyched that Alex was so excited about this idea. So without any further ado, the first person on our list is Chris. And because I haven't seen it, I will let Chris talk about what it is that he did. Take it away.
Cool. Alex, do you want me to share, or do you want to do that?
I'm happy to do that. Yeah, maybe once you can tell me if you want me to show your.
Yeah. So I I drew on purpose John 1 as my passage and kind of inspiration, and it's especially gravitated. John is such an oddball for the Gospels because his telling of God becoming human is like so cosmic and so seemingly not earthy in the way that, like, we'll get in later, like the genealogies root Jesus to a people and a place over a long period of time. Luke does something different than Matthew does with that, and but John talks about Jesus as the Logos, the Word made flesh. But I love there's like a shift in there that comes in verse 14, which is what really motivated me creatively, is that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and the words there is like tabernacling, pitched a tent. And Eugene Peterson did the Message translation, and when he translated that, he translated it as the Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. And so I really wanted something very like ground level, very street level, very like human, and chose to take some video of people walking, and probably with a little more time and resources would have included more people, but it's a little bit of a hard pitch to say, like, hey, let me walk behind you and videotape your legs. But I did have some willing participants. And so the first folks were Junie, and then Noah and Simeon, who have to because they're contractually obligated as like children. This is Alicia in front of her home, a newer friend, Oak Folk, from the afternoons, Gary, and then Loretta from the offices, and Udai show up in this video. And I really especially wanted to play with transparencies. I don't really do a lot of video editing or know the software very well, but I wanted to mess with transparencies because in these like very normal sites, some pretty extraordinary things are happening with Jesus's empathy and nearness to us and taking on our form, like thinking a lot of like Philippians 2, that Jesus somehow empties himself to take on human form. And so that was some of the focus, and I wanted to play with transparencies. And then towards the end of this, kind of like shotgun all of these images together. And so they're all kind of laying over each other at the same time as we meditate on this verse, what it means for God, the word, same word that was spoken over all of creation, and to then like localize in the coming of Christ. So that's some of what was going on, and in a lot of ways, like it was this sort of thing, like, you know, you control the process and things, and then when you get done, you're kind of like, oh wow, like some things were happening there that I hadn't anticipated, and so I was pretty pleased with how it came out.
Cool. Thanks, Chris. One thing I didn't mention before is that if you have near you like a pen and a piece of paper and things come to mind as people are talking, like questions or just like accolades or something, a comment, we want to try to keep things moving in terms of people presenting, but then at the end, there'll be an opportunity for people to ask questions to whomever they would like to, or, you know, say something that stuck out to them. And then that way, whoever needs to like jump off can do that without missing anything. So sorry, I didn't mention that earlier. Bethy, come to the front of the room.
I choose to put myself at the front of the room. Yeah, so I had the part of the story that introduces Zechariah and Elizabeth, and kind of the story of giving like their history of barrenness, and then moving all the way through like Zechariah's visitation from the angel in the temple to Elizabeth then becoming pregnant, and I think up until they have the baby, or just before they have the baby. And I am glad that I ended up with this passage, because it's one of the ones that, like, it's so familiar because it's always a part of the Christmas story. And to me, it has always seemed just kind of like a extra side point. And so it was fun to like sit with a passage that I have cared less about in the past, and end up finding things that were really sweet. And I ended up wanting to represent it through a collection of items, as you see. And I would have loved to have this collection be bigger. I think like a collection of objects is something that like has always really appealed to me as a way to like represent memories or like engage with a certain thing. And I think it's fun, just the more things there are to like look at and make more of a full picture. But these are the items that I ended up with. There's like the incense on the top right corner, which is supposed to represent Zechariah's time in the temple. And there's a pregnancy test on the top left-hand corner, which I got to represent the like history of barrenness for Elizabeth. But I also kind of liked that because I think it could go either way of representing like them actually getting pregnant with John. And it's hard to see in the video, but in the bottom left corner is glitter, which was what I chose to represent the visit and presence of the angel. And I struggled with that one just because I didn't want to do anything too folklore-y of like wings or even some sort of a figurine, and some sort of shimmery gold dust is the object that seemed most fitting to me. And then I had fun with this greeting card to represent kind of the celebration of when Elizabeth did get pregnant, and it was a fun way to kind of tie into like the shared experience with Mary, and kind of the togetherness of journeying through pregnancy. And then something that came to mind throughout, like reading through the passage and sitting with it for a while, and then like finally doing the video, was just wondering what those months were like between Zechariah and Elizabeth of not being able to talk, and just wondering like what that did to their relationship, and like what what like togetherness would have looked like in that time and in that way, and thinking about like like his perspective and his experience with that. And the thing that came to mind was just this little like, oh, he like probably got really into note writing, and some of the earlier mental drafts of this video involved several instances of notes of I think the first one I had a note that was to be like right after he got home from being in the temple and being like, hey honey, it was a super weird day at work, but like I'm okay, and like we have a lot to figure out, or something like that. So it was a fun mix of like trying to be observant and then also letting myself be pretty imaginative. Even just the like kind of playing with more actual objects versus like more contemporary objects. Like obviously there were not pregnancy tests in ancient times, but it felt fun to bring in that I don't know, that call to like, what would this be like if this were happening in my life or in today? Yeah. And I bounced back and forth between whether or not to add the annotations, and then ended up going for it because I wanted the collection as a whole to be somewhat of almost like an art journal page. And so I liked adding some of those words, and emphasizing some of the feeling behind the objects. So that was my thing.
Cool. Thanks, Bethy. Another thing that I probably should have said at the beginning is that at the mothership, when we shared things and people wanted to be like, yay, go you, without making any noise, we did this at people. So if you want to do that, like in lieu of like clapping at the end, you can do that. It's kind of silly and fun. Okay. Jana is up next.
Well, hello, everybody. So I had the Magnificat at the beginning of Luke 1, or well, it's in Luke 1. And yeah, maybe pause it for a second if that's okay. Because it's not, I don't think I sent many images. So it's yeah, I guess I was reading the scripture when we first talked about an art project, and I was imagining like a sculpture where specifically the part about the lowly are exalted and the rulers are brought down and scattered. So I was imagining like these as people, these little symbols. And I made the God figure is like the white sort of, I don't even know what shape you call that, but I made that out of slabs from clay. And then those are also made of clay and just painted in acrylic paint. But yeah, if you can play the video now, that'd be good. I know I only sent like a few photos and videos, so I'm not sure how long this part actually is. But yeah, so essentially those are just symbols, and Mary's in the blue, and it's that there was a candle inside of that vase type thing. So in my mind, it's kind of like that's God, and the higher ones are getting closer to God and can see God more in his glory. And so that's, I guess, a part of the light, and the colors all have symbolism as well, with like the silver are kind of like those rulers who have come and gone. And so it's still like a royal color, but not as much as the ones that are like being built up are like those that she's talking about, like the humble. And then what was the other thing I was gonna mention? That's it pretty much. I don't have that much more to say about it, except I just imagine that scene, like us and our different, like, I don't know, it's not a status and it's not economy, but it's like God's economy is very different than our economy in this world. And so I imagine it as sort of this reverse system compared to what we're used to. Anyways, that's kind of what it is. And I did put it on wood just because I wanted to symbolize sort of like, I'm thinking about Middle East and I'm thinking about sand. So that's the choice for the base there. And that's pretty much it. I did it from hand. I don't use a wheel, so it was fun making it. I had a little bit of a hard time firing because the studio I normally go to has been moving. So I got to go to a new studio, and that was fun to meet different people. And I really connected with this one woman who's the studio manager, and we like became friends through this whole thing. So, and she was helping me pick out glazes and stuff. And after we glazed the like vase type thing, I told her that was God, and she's like, "Oh, we should have done a better job." So that was pretty funny. I was like, "No pressure, that's God." And you know, I did my best, but I'm still like early on in a lot of the sculpture stuff I'm doing. So that's all I have, really.
Thanks, Jana.
Yeah.
Alex? We'll call an intermission. Actually, we would have an intermission.
Like disappearing and then, sorry. I also don't know if this is the right part. Okay, so there's my piece. So my reflection was partly about the story where Elizabeth and Mary meet. And in my mind, there's another version of this where it's two women. And I think that will be a time where like contact can happen. And so I wanted to imagine, kind of like Bethy, like imagine what's really happening in this situation. And I was especially imagining Elizabeth in this experience, where the story goes that Mary comes to visit, and upon like welcoming Mary, Elizabeth feels the baby in her stomach jump and move, and kind of in reaction to that, she's overcome with the Holy Spirit. And so I got interested in like observing all of your reflections has been a reminder God kind of making themselves known to us in all of these different containers and ways. And I started to think about God um, as a simile, about how often God is like, I am to you as this is to this, and that creates these parallels. So Elizabeth had these like parallel experiences where she both felt this intuitive knowing as a mom, where she felt her baby move, um, and she felt this parallel experience where she also felt the Holy Spirit activate in her being and in her body. And I love the idea of um, this child being an ushering in of the Holy Spirit, which is also something that I think a lot about in godly play. So my idea was that we would somehow create a duet between myself and then that's Sammy Enerson, who's behind the sheet, who's our child slash Holy Spirit. And I wanted this image of like I love the idea of a baby jumping, and it's kind of like, I don't know, I saw a lot of images in art of like Elizabeth and Mary of like they're just like very content and like still. And I thought about like what it's really like when a child like really just lets loose and like jumps and dances around. And Sammy was really good at that. He did a really good job. And Alan Baker also shot this, which is why it looks so good. He was amazing. I was like, Alan, I have a stand with an iPhone on it. What have you got? He was like, here's my professional gear. So he did a great job, and Sammy did a great job. And yeah, it was just a sweet experience, and I learned a lot also from putting it together. But yeah, I'm trying to think. I took little notes. I also thought about the significance of celebrating in this story, because these two women are kind of in very bizarre and not socially accepted pregnancies, like and yet when they meet one another, there's this Elizabeth is like calling Mary blessed, and receives her with such a knowing and an acceptance and a celebration of her situation. And that also was a parallel for me with a lot of friendships that I have, where despite how a circumstance looks, you just know like the Lord is up to something with you, and that you can celebrate that with one another. So I thought that was a beautiful thing. Here you go.
Can't wait to see it.
Yay. Thanks, Alex. I don't think we ever got Udai. So Kaylin is going to wrap us up. So I don't know what I think, so Kaylin has his own part by itself, isolated probably. Right, Kaylin?
Yeah, I've got a MP3 of
Okay,
the
cool.
parts that I recorded. So I'm not sure what would be the easiest way for me to play that through.
Chris has an idea. I don't know how that works in Zoom. Like, can you play a file for other people, or does it just pick it up from your own speakers?
Yeah, you can, and you have to say like whoever shares their screen can share their audio.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I made you a co-host so you can share, Kaylin, and then when you go to screen share, there's a little box at the bottom that says share computer audio. Make sure
Got
that's
it.
checked. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll get that set up in just a second. Let's see here. So yeah, so as I'm setting this up, one moment, hopefully this all works. Actually, forgot to click the screen share button. Sorry, I'm also doing the, one moment. I'll do the visualizer on iTunes so you guys have something to look at instead of just the iTunes page.
I thought that was the great conjunction that we just
Yeah.
saw. Yeah.
All right, so hopefully
It does kind of look like it.
y'all can hear this. Are y'all getting that? I'll let this play and then so yeah, that was so Katie kind of, from our side, asked the band for people to add some music, and I think initially there were some plans to do kind of more like actual, I would say actual songs, but kind of vocals and things like that. But then we shifted into ambient stuff, so wanted to help out, and I guess I got to use my Explosions in the Sky and various other ambient rock bands coming through. But yeah, I mean, it was kind of funny how it all worked out. I mean, really, like, I just was kind of thinking of ideas and had a sense. Silent Night is the first, so it's a medley, Silent Night, and then kind of a refrain from "O Come, Let Us Adore Him." And so Silent Night, just kind of thinking about it in some ways, is always kind of reflecting on this, has been probably my favorite traditional song. I think it's a Christmas song. I think it's really beautiful. I think the melody's really, really beautiful. And I think there's some like ties, and I think we've all done this or experienced this with like, Christmas Eve services, candle lights, everyone sings it together. And it's just like a really beautiful, peaceful moment. And so, yeah, I kind of had this idea of, from a sound standpoint, like kind of that drone and kind of that really open, airy, kind of again, ambient space. And so kind of was playing around with that initial melody idea. And then the kind of talking maybe a little bit about production parts of it, there's what's being used there on a lot on the main kind of melody section is what they call a reverse delay. And a lot of times you might hear this, like people have it kicked up all the way. It almost sounds like your guitar is getting like sucked into the amp. Like it sounds backwards. But what I've liked to do with it in the past is, with the way that it's mixed, is that it kind of, you can kind of hear the main melody line kind of, are the main notes first normally, or, kind of as you would expect. But then on the repeats and the subsequent delays, it kind of reverses back in. And so it kind of creates this really kind of pad ambient, like kind of synth texture. And so it just kind of creates almost this kind of loop to it. So that was kind of the initial thought that I wanted to go with. And from there, was just kind of writing parts around that. And then kind of in a way of also just trying to think of like, all right, how do I make this a little bit longer, but kind of what works with it, landed on the idea of just kind of, again, just kicking around ideas of the "Oh come let us adore him" refrain. Part of it is that it uses the same kind of chord progression as Silent Night, so it blends easy together. But kind of thinking about it too, and Marcus and I, with Marcus's part, so he wrote another section to this, and kind of in total with his is, and I'm blanking on the song, so someone could probably provide that, but his is written in a minor key, and we had kind of connected, and I said, hey, mine was in G major, his is in C minor, and so we kind of worked it out where his was able to transition into mine, but also the movement, thanks Chris, he said let all mortal flesh, the movement from minor to the major and that structure kind of, we were again kind of reflecting, like talking about this afterwards, like works with Advent to Christmas in terms of like the minor's kind of contemplative or contemplative, and there's a sense of longing to it, and then kind of as we even think about the flow, kind of move into the moment of Silent Night being about Christ's birth, and then kind of that's the event, and then because of the event, let's worship, let's come and let us adore him. So I wish I had this like grand, like kind of epiphany or like major revelation or story behind it, but really it's just kind of what musically worked well in my head and kind of bouncing around ideas. And then from there, it was kind of cool to see the story shape up after that.
Cool. Thanks, Kaylin. Yeah, so I think I didn't say this before, but Kaylin and Marcus together did the audio. So when you're watching the video, the first part is what Marcus did, and then it transitions into Kaylin's piece. And you can kind of feel the transition, like Kaylin was just talking about it. There's a shift there, which is really neat. I think it runs through it a few times through the video, so very cool. I saw that Chris wrote in the chat, which I think is a great idea, that if Alex has anything to say as the editor and creator really of the whole thing together as a piece, that would be cool.
Yeah. I was actually just, Kaylin, that was so interesting to hear, because in my like not knowing at all what to do with music while editing, it took lots of like moving and shifting to figure out like, I found that in my mind I was like, oh yeah, I'll just like loop the music back as long as the video takes. And because you feel that transition from minor into this like really like kind of explosive like celebratory music, it just did, like just looping that over and over again with the transition of the videos just was like not making sense and telling the story. So it was actually really fun to figure out like where the transition happens with the visual art, and then just trying to piece like how to you know, like mirror that with the music. So that was really cool. I don't know what else to say. What are the other questions?
Tell me about that baby footage.
Yeah, Katie, talk to us about baby.
So the baby is Elliot, who's my son.
Well, I'm gonna pull it up. You better watch out.
And he is just generally very cute. So he's fun to take photos and videos of. I was saying I assumed that you weren't going to be using any of the audio because it was all like quack, 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 woo! Like just us trying to get him to make different faces. But it was pretty sweet.
Oh my goodness, it's so cute.
So cute. Katie, I was like, both of his parents are definitely musicians because your baby noises were amazing.
It's funny too because we pulled his shirt down. I don't know, because it just seemed like having like, you know, baby clothes would kind of kill the whole mood of thinking about, you know, you don't want too much information to be thrown at people. So it seemed like no clothes was good, but we just pulled them down, and in some of the shots you can definitely see his little teal shirt. But that's a big purple like plush blanket that I have that he really loves because it's so soft. And so I thought he would be happy on it, and he was. And that's great. Yeah, I don't know what else to say other than Steve was actually the one who took the video, and it was really sweet because it was a little bit, I kind of put it off, and I had said something to him about it earlier, and he said, yeah, I'll get my camera out, because he has like a nice like digital SLR that he never uses because everyone has iPhones. And so, but it takes video too. And so he got it out. And then once he was using it, he did like a little photo shoot, which Alex, you probably saw all the pictures were in that drive folder that I sent you. Of some of them, he looks like, I'm like, are there like weird baby calendars with babies being like, hey girl? Because some of them were like that. But anyway, it was a sweet moment for us because we don't often like sit and try to take photos, and you know, we do sometimes, but anyway, it was a sweet moment for us, and so I'm glad that it was useful. And Steve's not here, or I would have him say something about what he was going for. But yeah, thank you for including my baby. Does anyone have any questions? Actually, I'll start. I had one question for Kaylin. Was that all electric guitar, or did you use any like MIDI stuff in that, or was it just all from your actual guitar instrument?
Yeah, that was all guitar. Just all one of my electrics, the silver one. If you were curious, but yeah, I mean, that was kind of something to think about too when I was thinking about parts. It's like I mean, that is really the only instrument I play. I can hook up the keyboard maybe and kind of figure some things out if I needed to, but it was like, okay, kind of how can I make this work? And so that's where kind of the sounds and the, you know, kind of the production of it came into as far as like delays and reverb. But yeah, it was all guitar.
Yeah, that's so cool. I was really impressed because I didn't hear it until like the very end. And I had that thought. I was like, these guys mostly just play guitar. Like, what is this gonna sound like? And I was super impressed with how like full and developed all of the music was, coming from two guys who just play guitar. It's impressive what you can do with that. Does anyone else have any questions for any person?
I had maybe question or response for Bethy. I was like so interested in, especially when you're talking about the glitter, because I also had missed that. Like I could see it in the video, but I just missed the connection. And I loved that, like, this idea of having these like physical items in this collection of items to tell the narrative, but also the challenge of finding items to express, like, how do you express like an angelic visitation without it being cheesy? And I thought you skated the line so well, because I found like a lot of humor in that brief. Like I love the card. There was just a moment of humor for me with like a card being like, can't wait to see your babe, love, Mary Joseph. But then also not feeling cheesy. So I just wondered if you might talk a little bit about like kind of gathering those items and if that was a challenge.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I did. For some reason, I think there's so much like, I don't know, content out there of cheesy angel things, and so that one in particular, I spent a lot of time thinking about how to represent, um and I think this is not a thought I had beforehand, but maybe an afterthought after I had like finished the video. Even um I think the glitter worked out well because it felt like a way to um uh like the idea that there would be like remnants afterwards of like such an encounter, and how even that, like, it feels appropriate that it's even like hard to see, and like sometimes it's catching the light and sometimes it's not, and that felt that feels fitting with like a bewildering experience of like, who are you and what are you saying and why do you know about my life, and like yeah, um it did feel hard to get a good collection together. I um and that was like the thing that put off filming the video for the longest, just so I could have room to brainstorm. And I thought about getting more things. I at one point had like a baby spoon, that like one of the ones with the little like rubber top, and I lost it, but I thought about like getting more baby stuff, and I think in the end I decided not to, because it would be easy to just get like a ton of baby stuff and then not a lot of other things to represent the other part of the story. So I don't know. In earlier mental drafts of the video, I thought about getting like not actual wings, but maybe like single feathers to represent the angel and things like that. So it was fun to kind of toss around ideas of what to do. And even with the like Zachariah's muteness, I thought about getting like a mask, and then didn't want, like, I decided not to do that because I wasn't trying to have like associations with COVID, and I figured like that would just be what people saw in that. Um and thought about like, I don't know, like sign language pamphlets or just all sorts of things. So it was interesting to kind of like walk through different possibilities in my head. Um, I thought about it'd be fun to try to get like a, geez, what is it called when you're pregnant and you see your baby for the first time? The ultrasound shot. And I was like, no, like, where am I going to get one of those? And anyway,
I
yeah,
have a million.
it was fun. I think in an ideal world, I would have loved to see like maybe twice as many objects as what I ended up with, just to have more of a, to have it be maybe even just a little bit more overwhelming in terms of like things to look at and try to piece together. I don't know if that provided more of what you were hoping for, Alex, but that was some thought behind it.
I loved.
the pregnancy.
Oh, go ahead.
I just had a comment. The pregnancy test was amazing. I feel like that's so evocative for any person to see that. It means something to everyone. And so I think starting with that was pretty brilliant.
Thank you. It was interesting. I had a little bit of a like weird, not quite a crisis, but this moment of like, do I even like, is it even right for me to be purchasing a pregnancy test when like should that only be reserved for like people who can like claim an experience worthy? Like I had a lot of like wonderings about like how much was I stepping into a story that wasn't mine. And my roommate assured me that all pregnant women or potentially pregnant women forgave me and that it's fine and no one's offended. But it was interesting to even just like be in that aisle in Target and like, I don't know, feeling like somewhat of an imposter and also imagining like just the range of emotions someone may feel in kind of the weight of that context or that potential. So it was a neat experience for me too.
I loved. I think your section was like kind of paradigmatic of like the pregnancy test and the glitter as like these like two poles of like mundane, but like in a very particular and like maybe joyful, maybe scary, maybe traumatic way, and then like glitter, which is always special and even like childlike, you know. But like
Yeah.
And kind of saw this like on a bunch of especially like the glitter part of like it seemed I think all of like collectively the production value was like I loved it because like it was very obvious that these were like made by like us and friends, you know, like even like the really like bordering on pro parts of it and Alex's amazing editing, but at the same time like almost every single one like chose something in their media that was like really elusive, like Kaylin with like the reverse delay, and like Marcus with like this really rad organ that like comes out of nowhere, and then like the iridescent of the glitter, and like Jana, you had like abstract shapes, right? Like and Alex used shadows, and like I used overlays, you know, like so it's like all this kind of I don't know, like it's just like Jewish tradition of talking, like you're very hesitant to talk directly about God, like you don't say Yahweh, like you talk around God, and like I felt like there were completely kind of independent of each other. I don't feel like any of us really talked to each other about that, but in each in our own way kind of like took up some way to like talk around talking about God in a way that I think is like wonder filled, like really wonder filled. Yeah, I like that.
Chris, I don't know how intentional you were with the setting of your walking shots, but something that I liked seeing in the different videos you took were just the range of setting, which feels also to be true of God with us, is that God is with us everywhere. And I loved seeing like the person walking in the church building and the person walking in the middle of the road and like Simi skipping down the sidewalk. and even just like the like other little comparisons of like the person wearing slippers and then like the person wearing nicer pants for work, or this, like those kinds of observations. It was fun to be able to make those comparisons or see them, especially just like one right after another, or with the like transparency transitions. It was cool to see like the extent of the meaning of the scripture in that. So I liked that a lot.
So interesting thinking about this now. So I was thinking about how we're, coming at something, surrounding something from different angles, and then putting those observations together, like Chris was mentioning. And I think that was like my hope for the project. So it's so neat to like hear that. And B, I think it made a big difference too for each of us to take like a small chunk of the story, because I was thinking about like, what would it have been like if we would have each just been given the prompt of like, create a reflection to the Christmas story. And I imagine a lot of the imagery would have been maybe more direct and maybe centered more around the baby in the manger. Like, I'm thinking about this kind of iconic imagery that we get with Christmas stuff. And so for me, like really observing these more like what we think of as like minor characters, or even like following the uptick in the music, where like there are all these things that happen and Christ is born, but then the story continues, and there are these like incredible visitors, and then they flee, and then they return, and there's like, political exile and like threat of death, and all the like visitations happens after the birth, and then it's about protecting this Christ child. And so I think also part of that is like actually focusing on these other surrounding parts of the story, and it creates more connection to like, this character is involved and this character is involved in it, and this just like, even having like the strangeness of Elizabeth is a huge part of it, and we know where her like baby grows up to be. And so it's just, I think that too was really refreshing for me in thinking about this story with a wider gaze, a little bit of like really trying to take in all the moving parts, and seeing how like kind of chaotic and it became less easy to like go into it directly. And I think that's when like the periphery started to like fill up, and that was really neat to see. That made me really happy also stringing it together, during editing.
Cool. I think maybe we have time for one more question or reflection, if anybody has one. And if not, then thank you everyone for coming. This is really fun, and I hope that we do more of this. I feel like this is a really neat idea, and I just want to say I'm really grateful for Alex's leadership, and like I think under a different person it would have been very different, and I think the openness that was there around like everything, I think really gave people or made people feel comfortable participating and helped the outcome be what it was. So thanks to Alex, and yeah, hopefully we can do more stuff. It'd be cool to do something like this around different, church calendar stuff. Not to get too ahead of ourselves because everyone should have some rest coming up. But
Katie, thank you so much for having this idea. I think this was such a like figuring out how to connect with one another through this process as we like went off on our own. I just feel like this was a great way to check in and celebrate one another. So you're a genius. And also I'm just seeing this if there